Have you ever walked into a family gathering or community meeting only to watch everything explode into chaos within minutes? You stand there, watching people you care about tear each other apart over issues that seemed manageable just moments before. The voices get louder, tempers flare higher, and suddenly you're caught in the middle of a storm that feels impossible to calm. You want to help, but every word you speak seems to make things worse. Your years of experience tell you there has to be a better way, but in the heat of the moment, wisdom feels powerless against raw emotion. This is the moment when you realize that all your life experience means nothing if you don't know how to apply it when it matters most. The truth is, conflict is inevitable as we age, but suffering through endless family drama and community disputes doesn't have to be. You've reached a stage in life where you possess something younger people lack: the emotional maturity to see beyond the immediate battle to the deeper needs driving the conflict. Yet so many of us feel helpless when tensions rise, watching relationships. We've spent decades building crumble over disagreements that could be resolved with the right approach. The problem isn't that conflicts happen. It's that we've never learned the specific techniques that can transform explosive situations into opportunities for deeper understanding. Your wisdom is there, waiting to be channeled through practical methods that actually work when emotions are running high. The question isn't whether you're wise enough to handle these situations, it's whether you know the right tools to apply that wisdom effectively. What if I told you that there are 8 specific techniques that can completely change how you handle family conflicts and community disagreements? These aren't complicated psychological theories or abstract concepts that sound good on paper, but fail in real life. Instead, they're practical methods that work especially well for people who have the life experience and emotional intelligence that comes with maturity. You already possess the foundation these techniques require: patience, perspective, and the understanding that preserving relationships matters more than winning arguments. The challenge has been knowing exactly how to channel these qualities into specific actions that can calm heated situations and guide people toward resolution. Once you learn these 8 approaches, you'll never again feel helpless when conflict erupts around you. These techniques work because they're designed for people who understand that real strength lies not in overpowering others, but in creating space for everyone to be heard and respected. You don't need to be louder or more aggressive than the people causing the chaos. Instead, you become the calm center that draws others away from destructive patterns and toward productive conversation. Your role isn't to fix everyone's problems or force them to agree with each other. Rather, you become the person who knows how to shift the energy in the room, how to help people feel understood, and how to guide groups toward solutions that honor everyone's dignity. This is leadership that flows naturally from the wisdom you've already gained through decades of life experience. By the end of our time together, you'll have witnessed these 8 techniques in action through 2 real-world scenarios that probably feel very familiar to your own experiences. You'll see exactly how each method works, why it's effective, and how you can adapt it to your own family situations and community involvement. More importantly, you'll understand that your age and experience aren't obstacles to effective conflict resolution. They're your greatest advantages. The wisdom you've accumulated over the years becomes the foundation for techniques that can transform chaos into connection, turning you into the person others look to when tensions rise. If you're ready to see how your natural wisdom can be channeled into practical tools for peace, hit that like button and subscribe for more content designed specifically for your stage of life. To help you see this more clearly, I want to tell you about 2 situations that unfolded on the same evening, each demonstrating how these techniques can transform seemingly impossible conflicts into opportunities for understanding. The first takes place at a community center during what started as a routine neighborhood meeting about parking regulations. Frank, a 62-year-old former contractor, had arrived already frustrated about new restrictions that were affecting his small delivery business. Carol, 65, and recently retired from teaching, had come hoping to address safety concerns about speeding cars on her street. Paul, the 68-year-old meeting facilitator, had seen enough community disputes to know that good intentions could quickly spiral into harmful confrontations. None of them expected the evening to become a masterclass in conflict resolution. But that's exactly what happened when Frank's frustration boiled over into the kind of heated outburst that usually destroys any chance of productive discussion. The meeting had started peacefully enough, with Paul welcoming the dozen residents who had gathered in the community center's main room. Folding chairs were arranged in a loose circle, and a small table held copies of the proposed parking regulations that the city council wanted to implement. The fluorescent lights cast their familiar harsh glow over the linoleum floor, and the smell of coffee from the kitchen mixed with the faint mustiness that seemed to inhabit every community building. Paul had just finished explaining the purpose of the meeting when Frank suddenly stood up, his face flushed with anger. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Frank shouted, waving the regulation papers in the air. "These new rules are going to destroy small businesses like mine. I've been making deliveries on these streets for 15 years, and now you're telling me I can't park my truck where I need to work?" His voice echoed off the painted cinder-block walls, and the other residents shifted, uncomfortably in their seats. "Who came up with this bureaucratic nonsense? Don't any of you people understand how the real world works?" Other residents immediately began responding, their voices rising to match Frank's volume. Mrs. Henderson, a 70-year-old retired nurse, called out, "Well, maybe if delivery drivers would stop blocking our driveways, we wouldn't need these rules." A middle-aged father named Tom jumped to his feet, pointing at Frank. "Your truck almost hit my kid last week when you were backing out of that tight space." Within moments, the room had erupted into a cacophony of overlapping complaints, accusations, and defensive responses. Frank's face grew redder as he tried to shout over the crowd. "You people have no idea what it's like to run a business. I'm just trying to make a living here." But his voice was lost in the chaos as neighbors began arguing not just with Frank, but with each other about various parking grievances that had been building up for months. Some residents sided with Frank, understanding the challenges of running a business, while others supported stricter regulations to protect children and maintain neighborhood peace. Paul, still seated at the front of the room, watched the escalating conflict with the calm expression of someone who had witnessed this pattern many times before. He knew that trying to speak over the crowd would only add to the noise and chaos. Instead, he made a choice that seemed counterintuitive, but proved to be the first key to transforming the entire dynamic of the meeting. Paul simply stopped talking and waited. This was the first technique: strategic silence. Rather than attempting to restore order through louder authority or banging a gavel, Paul understood that silence could be more powerful than words. He sat back in his chair, folded his hands calmly in his lap, and waited with infinite patience for the room to notice his stillness. The technique works because it breaks the escalation pattern that feeds arguments. When everyone is shouting, the natural tendency is to shout louder to be heard, but when someone chooses silence, it creates a vacuum that eventually draws attention. At first, the arguing continued unabated. Frank was still ranting about government overreach, while other residents hurled their own complaints into the verbal melee. But gradually, one by one, people began to notice that Paul wasn't participating in the chaos. His calm, silent presence created a stark contrast to the agitation surrounding him. Mrs. Henderson was the first to stop talking, her eyes drawn to Paul's peaceful demeanor. Then Tom noticed and fell silent, followed by others who became curious about why the meeting facilitator wasn't trying to control the situation. Frank continued his angry monologue for another full minute, unaware that the room had grown quiet around him. His voice seemed to grow louder in the comparative silence, making his words sound harsh and unreasonable, even to his own ears. When he finally paused to take a breath, the silence was complete. Every eye in the room was focused on the contrast between Frank's agitated state and Paul's serene composure. Frank looked around, suddenly aware that he was the only one still speaking, and his shoulders sagged slightly as the weight of the moment settled on him. Paul let the silence extend for several more seconds, allowing its power to fully permeate the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and measured, forcing everyone to lean in slightly to hear him. "Frank," he said gently, "I can see you're really concerned about how these changes might affect your business." This simple acknowledgement, delivered without judgment or defensiveness, immediately shifted the energy in the room. But it was Carol who demonstrated the second technique, emotional mirroring. As a recently retired teacher, she had spent decades learning how to connect with frustrated students and angry parents. She understood that Frank's outburst came from a place of genuine fear and worry, not malice. Instead of dismissing his concerns or telling him to calm down, she chose to reflect his emotions back to him in a way that validated his feelings without endorsing his behavior. "Frank," Carol said, her voice warm and understanding, "it sounds like you're really worried about your business and how you'll be able to serve your customers if these parking rules go into effect." She paused, making sure her words sank in, before continuing. "I can understand why that would be frightening, especially when you've built your livelihood around being able to access these neighborhoods efficiently." The effect was immediate and remarkable. Frank's defensive posture began to soften as he heard his emotions reflected back to him without judgment. For the first time since the meeting began, he felt heard rather than attacked. His clenched fists relaxed, and some of the tension left his shoulders. "Yes," he said quietly, "that's exactly it. I'm not trying to cause problems for anyone. I just don't know how I'm supposed to do my job if I can't park where I need to work." Emotional mirroring works because it validates feelings without necessarily agreeing with actions. Carol didn't say Frank was right to shout or that the parking regulations were wrong. Instead, she acknowledged the fear and concern underlying his angry outburst. This validation allowed Frank to feel understood, which reduced his need to continue defending his position aggressively. When people feel heard and understood, they naturally become more open to hearing other perspectives. The other residents watched this exchange with growing interest. They could see Frank's transformation from an angry adversary to someone who was simply worried about his livelihood. Mrs. Henderson, who had been ready to argue with Frank just minutes before, found herself nodding in understanding. "I hadn't thought about it from that perspective," she admitted. "I was just focused on the safety issues in our neighborhood." This was the perfect moment for Paul to introduce the third technique, the reset question. He had seen how strategic silence and emotional mirroring had created a foundation of calm and understanding. Now he needed to shift the entire focus of the conversation from blame and defensiveness to collaboration and problem-solving. The reset question is designed to redirect group energy from past grievances toward future solutions. "Frank, Mrs. Henderson, everyone," Paul said, his voice still calm but now carrying a note of gentle authority, "I want to ask you all something important. What outcome would actually help everyone here?" He paused, letting the question settle before explaining further. Instead of arguing about what's wrong with the current situation or what's unfair about the proposed changes, what would success look like for all of us? The reset question worked because it immediately shifted the conversation from a zero-sum conflict to a collaborative problem-solving session. Instead of Frank feeling like he had to defend his business against the neighborhood's safety concerns, everyone was now invited to envision a solution that could address both issues. The question reframed the entire dynamic from adversarial to cooperative. Frank was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. When he spoke, his tone was thoughtful rather than defensive. I guess what I really need is to be able to make my deliveries efficiently without causing problems for the families who live here. I don't want kids getting hurt, and I don't want to block driveways. I just need to be able to do my job. Mrs. Henderson leaned forward in her chair, engaged now rather than angry. And what we need is for our children to be safe when they're playing outside, and for our guests to be able to visit without finding their cars blocked in. She looked at Frank with genuine curiosity rather than hostility. Maybe there's a way to make both things happen. Tom, the father who had earlier accused Frank of nearly hitting his child, surprised everyone by joining the collaborative spirit. What if we looked at specific streets and specific times? Maybe there are some areas where deliveries could happen without creating safety issues, and some times of day when parking restrictions could be relaxed for business purposes. Paul smiled, recognizing that the reset question had successfully transformed the meeting from a battleground into a workshop. But he knew that maintaining this collaborative spirit would require one more crucial element. Even when people are working together towards solutions, there's always a risk that compromise proposals will be met with criticism or rejection, which can quickly spiral back into conflict. This was where Carol demonstrated the fourth and final technique from this first story: acknowledgement without agreement. When Frank proposed a specific compromise about delivery times and designated parking zones, Carol knew that his suggestion wasn't perfect and wouldn't address all of the neighborhood's concerns. However, she also understood that dismissing his effort would likely send him back into defensive mode and undo all the progress they had made. Frank, I really appreciate that you're willing to work with us on finding a solution, Carol said warmly. The fact that you're thinking about how to balance your business needs with our neighborhood concerns shows a lot of good faith. She paused, then continued. Your idea about designated delivery zones is interesting. I think we'll need to look at the specific locations and work out some details. But I'm glad you're approaching this as something we can solve together. Acknowledgement without agreement is crucial because it validates effort and good intentions without committing to outcomes that might not work for everyone. Carol didn't say Frank's proposal was perfect or that she agreed with all aspects of it. Instead, she acknowledged his willingness to compromise and his collaborative spirit, which encouraged him to remain open to further discussion and refinement. The technique worked beautifully. Frank felt appreciated for his effort to find middle ground, which made him more receptive to suggestions for improving his proposal. Other residents, seeing that their concerns would also be heard and addressed, began offering their own ideas for how delivery zones might be configured to maximize both business efficiency and neighborhood safety. By the end of the meeting, the group had outlined a framework for compromise that addressed Frank's business needs while incorporating the safety concerns that had originally motivated the parking regulation discussions. More importantly, they had demonstrated that community conflicts don't have to result in winners and losers. With the right techniques, neighbors can work together to find solutions that honor everyone's legitimate needs and concerns. As you watch this story unfold, you can see how each technique built naturally on the previous one. Strategic silence created the space for emotions to settle and attention to focus. Emotional mirroring validated feelings and reduced defensiveness. The reset question shifted the conversation from conflict to collaboration, and acknowledgement without agreement maintained the collaborative spirit while ensuring that all voices remained heard and respected. These four techniques work especially well for people in your stage of life because they require the kind of emotional maturity and patience that comes with experience. Younger people often feel compelled to react immediately to conflict, to take sides, or to impose solutions through force of personality. But you have the wisdom to understand that sustainable solutions require everyone to feel heard and respected. You know that winning an argument isn't worth destroying relationships, and you have the patience to let techniques like strategic silence work their magic. The beauty of these approaches is that they don't require you to be the smartest person in the room or the most articulate speaker. They don't depend on your ability to dominate a conversation or intimidate others into submission. Instead, they leverage the natural authority that comes with age and wisdom, channeling it into techniques that create space for everyone to contribute to solutions. This is leadership that flows from understanding rather than power, and it's particularly effective for people who have lived long enough to see the long-term consequences of both conflict and cooperation. Take a moment to think about recent conflicts in your own life, whether they happened at family gatherings, community meetings, or neighborhood disputes. Can you see how strategic silence might have changed the dynamic when everyone was talking at once? Would emotional mirroring have helped you connect with someone who seemed unreasonably angry? Could the reset question have shifted a blame session into a problem-solving conversation? And might acknowledgement without agreement have kept collaborative relationships intact while working through disagreements? If you're finding these techniques as valuable as I believe you will, hit that subscribe button to make sure you don't miss the rest of this content designed specifically for your wisdom and experience. While Frank, Carol, and Paul were discovering the power of these first 4 techniques at their community meeting, another conflict was unfolding just a few miles away that would demonstrate 4 additional approaches to handling explosive family situations. Let me share another story that shows how these remaining techniques can transform even the most volatile family disputes into opportunities for healing and understanding. The second story takes place at a lakeside family reunion where 3 generations had gathered to celebrate what should have been a joyful weekend together. Linda, 61, and the acknowledged family matriarch since her mother's passing 2 years earlier, had spent weeks organizing the event at a rented cabin overlooking the water. Her husband Mike, 66, and known for his steady patience, had helped coordinate travel arrangements for relatives coming from several states. Susan, 63, and Linda's diplomatic cousin, had driven down from the neighboring state with her own family, looking forward to reconnecting with relatives she hadn't seen in months. The evening air was warm and pleasant, with the gentle sound of water lapping against the dock, providing a peaceful backdrop as extended family members enjoyed dinner on the cabin's wraparound deck. The trouble began when Gary, Linda's 59-year-old brother, arrived 3 hours later than expected, his face flushed with anger and his voice already raised before he even reached the deck. Gary had always been the most volatile member of the family, prone to emotional outbursts that had disrupted gatherings for decades. But tonight was different. Tonight, Gary had come armed with legal documents and a list of grievances that he was determined to air in front of the entire family. "I need to talk to all of you about what Linda has done," Gary announced as he stormed onto the deck, interrupting conversations and causing children to look up from their plates with worried expressions. The pleasant evening atmosphere immediately shifted as relatives sensed the tension radiating from Gary's rigid posture and clenched jaw. "I've been cheated out of my fair share of Mum's estate, and I'm not going to let this family pretend everything is fine when Linda has been manipulating things behind everyone's back." The accusations hit Linda like a physical blow. She had spent the 2 years since their mother's death handling all the estate responsibilities, dealing with lawyers and accountants, managing property sales, and trying to distribute assets according to their mother's wishes. The work had been exhausting and emotionally draining, made more difficult by Gary's frequent demands for updates and his complaints about every decision. Now, in front of cousins, spouses, and grandchildren, he was publicly accusing her of dishonesty and manipulation. "Gary, please," Linda said, her voice shaking with hurt and shock. "This isn't the time or place for this discussion. We have family here who came to—" "Don't you dare tell me what's appropriate," Gary interrupted, his voice rising even higher. "You've been controlling this family's money for 2 years, making decisions without consulting anyone, and now you want to control. When I can even talk about it?" He pulled a folder of documents from under his arm and slammed it on the picnic table, causing glasses to rattle and several children to move closer to their parents. Other family members immediately began reacting to Gary's outburst. Uncle Robert, 74 and the family's eldest member, stood up and pointed an arthritic finger at Gary. "You have no right to come here and attack your sister like this, especially not in front of the children." Cousin James, Linda's contemporary at 58, called out from across the deck, "Gary, we all know Linda has been doing her best with a difficult situation. Why don't you calm down and we can discuss this rationally?" But Gary's anger only intensified as he felt the family rallying to Linda's defense. "Oh, of course you're all going to take her side. She's been playing the martyr for 2 years, acting like she's doing everyone a favor, when really she's been making sure she gets the biggest share of everything." His accusations became more specific and more hurtful, detailing his suspicions about property valuations, questioning Linda's handling of their mother's jewelry, and suggesting that she had influenced their mother's final decisions about asset distribution. The deck erupted into chaos as family members began shouting over each other. Some defended Linda's integrity and her years of selfless service to their mother. Others tried to reason with Gary, attempting to explain the complexities of estate management. A few family members, uncomfortable with the public nature of the conflict, began gathering their children and threatening to leave. The peaceful reunion was disintegrating into the kind of family drama that creates wounds lasting for generations. In the midst of this emotional storm, Susan recognized that someone needed to model a different way of responding to Gary's volcanic anger. As a career counselor who had spent decades helping people navigate workplace conflicts, she understood that Gary's accusations, while hurtful and inappropriate, were coming from a place of deep pain and perceived injustice. Rather than adding her voice to the defensive chorus or trying to shout Gary down, Susan chose to demonstrate the 5th technique, controlled breathing response. Susan stood up slowly from her chair, but instead of immediately responding to Gary's tirade, she took 3 deliberate deep breaths. Her breathing was visible and intentional, drawing attention to her calm demeanor in contrast to the emotional chaos surrounding her. When she finally spoke, her voice was slow, measured, and steady. She maintained direct eye contact with Gary, her posture relaxed but attentive. "Gary," she said, her words coming slowly and deliberately, "I can see that you're in a lot of pain about this situation." Her controlled breathing and measured pace created a pocket of calm in the emotional hurricane. The technique works because physiological calm can influence group dynamics. When one person demonstrates controlled breathing and deliberate speech, it unconsciously encourages others to slow down their own responses. The effect was noticeable almost immediately. Gary, still angry but somewhat taken aback by Susan's unexpected calmness, found his own breathing beginning to match her rhythm. Other family members who had been shouting over each other just moments before began to lower their voices slightly, as they unconsciously responded to Susan's modeling of emotional regulation. Her steady eye contact and relaxed posture sent a message that she was fully present and listening, not preparing to attack or defend. "I am in pain," Gary admitted, his voice still angry but no longer at a shout. "I feel like my own family doesn't trust me, doesn't value me, and doesn't think I deserve to be treated fairly." For the first time since his arrival, Gary's words revealed the hurt underlying his anger, giving the family a glimpse of the vulnerable emotions driving his aggressive behavior. But Mike knew that acknowledging Gary's pain wasn't enough to prevent the situation from spiraling back into destructive territory. As Linda's husband and a man who had witnessed Gary's pattern of explosive behavior for over 30 years, Mike understood that Gary's feelings were valid even if his expression of them was harmful to everyone present. This was the perfect moment to demonstrate the sixth technique, boundary setting with compassion. Mike stood up and walked slowly toward Gary, his movements calm and non-threatening. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had earned respect through years of patient wisdom. Gary, I want you to know that your feelings about this situation are completely valid, and I understand why you would be upset if you feel like you've been treated unfairly. He paused, making sure Gary heard and absorbed this validation before continuing. But attacking Linda in front of the whole family, especially the children, isn't going to solve anything, and it's not something I can allow to continue, Mike said firmly but without hostility. If you want to have a productive conversation about the estate, we need to find a way to do that without hurting people who love you and want to help resolve whatever problems exist. Boundary setting with compassion works because it acknowledges legitimate feelings while refusing to accept destructive behavior. Mike didn't dismiss Gary's concerns or tell him his feelings were wrong. Instead, he clearly stated that aggressive public attacks needed to stop before any productive conversation could happen. Crucially, he delivered this boundary with understanding rather than punishment, framing it as necessary for problem solving, rather than as a judgment of Gary's character. Gary looked around the deck, suddenly aware of the children's frightened faces and the adults' tense expressions. For the first time since his arrival, he seemed to see the impact his behavior was having on people he genuinely loved. His shoulders sagged slightly as the weight of Mike's words settled on him. "I didn't mean to scare the kids," he said quietly. "I just feel like nobody listens to me unless I'm loud about it." This admission created an opening for Linda to demonstrate the seventh technique, the perspective shift. Despite feeling hurt and attacked by Gary's accusations, Linda recognized that this moment called for something larger than defending herself or counterattacking her brother. As the family matriarch, she had the opportunity to remind everyone of the values and relationships that transcended their immediate conflict. "Gary, Mike, everyone," Linda said, her voice stronger now but still gentle. "I want us all to think about something for a minute. Mom always said that family was the most important thing in the world to her. She used to tell us that people and relationships were worth more than any amount of money or property." Linda paused, letting her words resonate before continuing. "I have to ask myself, and I want all of us to ask ourselves, what would Mom want to see happening at this family gathering?" The perspective shift works by reconnecting people with shared values that transcend immediate conflicts. Instead of arguing about who was right or wrong about estate management, Linda redirected the conversation toward their mother's memory and her values. This technique moves discussions from who gets what to how do we honor what matters most to all of us. The effect on Gary was profound. His anger began to visibly drain away as he remembered his mother's love for family harmony and her frequent lectures about the importance of supporting each other through difficult times. "Mom always hated it when we fought," he said, his voice now quiet and reflective. "She used to say that watching her children argue was the most painful thing she could imagine." Other family members nodded in recognition, remembering their own conversations with their mother about family unity. Uncle Robert sat back down, his defensive posture softening. "She told me once that she hoped her death would bring us closer, together, not drive us apart," he said sadly. "I think she'd be heartbroken to see us like this." The shift in Gary's emotional state created space for Susan to introduce the eighth and final technique, collaborative problem solving. She recognized that while Gary's feelings had been acknowledged and his behavior had been appropriately bounded, the underlying issues still needed to be addressed in a way that allowed everyone to feel included in the solution, rather than having resolution imposed upon them. Gary, Linda, all of you, Susan said, her voice warm but purposeful. I think we're all in agreement that we want to honor Mom's memory and maintain our family relationships. What if we agreed to postpone any detailed discussion about estate issues until tomorrow morning when we've all had time to process tonight's emotions? She looked around the group, making eye contact with each person before continuing. Instead of spending this evening on financial matters, what if we spent it sharing positive memories of Mom and talking about how we can support each other going forward? Susan paused, then added the crucial element that made this collaborative, rather than imposed. Gary, would you be willing to help us plan how that conversation should happen? You know the estate details better than most of us, so your input on how to structure a productive discussion would be really valuable. Collaborative problem-solving ensures that everyone feels included in creating solutions rather than having resolutions imposed upon them. Susan didn't just suggest that they postpone the difficult conversation. She invited Gary to help design how that conversation should unfold. This approach transformed him from someone whose concerns were being dismissed to someone whose expertise was being valued and utilized. Gary was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with the decision between holding on to his anger and accepting the family's invitation to collaborate. Finally, he nodded slowly. I think that would be good, he said. I don't want to ruin this reunion, and I know I came in too hot tonight. If we could talk tomorrow when everyone's calmer, and if Linda is willing to go through the details with me, maybe we can figure out where the disconnect is. Linda immediately stepped forward, her relief visible on her face. Of course I'm willing, Gary. I've wanted to have this conversation with you for months, but I wanted it to be productive, not destructive. She paused, then added, and I'm sorry if my handling of things made you feel excluded. That was never my intention. The remainder of the evening unfolded exactly as Susan had suggested. Family members shared stories about their mother, laughed over old photographs, and reconnected with the love and shared history that had brought them together in the first place. Gary participated fully in these conversations, his earlier anger replaced by genuine engagement with relatives he hadn't seen in months. The children, who had been frightened and confused by the earlier conflict, relaxed back into the joy of playing with their cousins. When the family finally gathered the next morning for the promised discussion about estate matters, the conversation was productive and collaborative. Gary's concerns were addressed with detailed explanations and documentation. Linda's decisions were reviewed and validated by other family members who could see the care and thoughtfulness she had invested in every choice. Most importantly, they developed a plan for ongoing communication about financial matters that ensured Gary would feel included in future decisions. Looking back at this family reunion story, you can see how each of the 4 techniques built upon the others to transform a potentially devastating conflict into an opportunity for deeper family connection. Controlled breathing response created a foundation of calm in the midst of emotional chaos. Boundary setting with compassion validated feelings while refusing to accept destructive behavior. The perspective shift reconnected everyone with shared values that mattered more than their immediate disagreement, and collaborative problem-solving ensured that resolution came through inclusion rather than exclusion. These techniques require the kind of emotional maturity and life perspective that typically comes with age and experience. Younger family members might have responded to Gary's accusations with immediate defensiveness or counterattacks. They might have escalated the conflict by matching his anger with their own, or they might have simply walked away, allowing the family rift to deepen and become permanent. But the older family members in this story understood something crucial. Preserving family relationships requires someone to be willing to respond differently than the immediate emotional impulse suggests. They had lived long enough to know that winning an argument isn't worth losing a brother, and that family conflicts, however painful in the moment, are often opportunities to address underlying issues that have been festering beneath the surface. The beauty of these techniques is that they don't require you to be perfect or to suppress your own legitimate emotions. Linda was genuinely hurt by Gary's accusations, and she had every right to feel defensive about the years of work she had invested in managing their mother's estate. Mike was legitimately concerned about the impact Gary's behavior was having on the children and other family members. Susan was appropriately worried about the long-term consequences of allowing the conflict to escalate, but instead of letting these valid emotions drive them toward responses that would have made the situation worse, they channeled their maturity and life experience into techniques that created space for everyone's needs to be heard and addressed. They understood that real strength lies not in overpowering others, but in creating conditions where everyone can contribute to solutions that honor both individual concerns and family unity. As you reflect on this family reunion story, think about conflicts in your own family that might benefit from these approaches. Have you experienced situations where someone's anger or accusations created chaos at family gatherings? Can you imagine how controlled breathing response might have changed the dynamic when emotions were running high? Would boundary setting with compassion have helped you address destructive behavior while still validating underlying concerns? Could the perspective shift have reminded everyone of shared values that matter more than immediate disagreements? And might collaborative problem-solving have turned family conflicts into opportunities for everyone to feel heard and included in solutions? If you're recognizing the power of these approaches and want to see how all 8 techniques work together, hit that like button and let me know in the comments which of these situations felt most familiar to your own experiences. Now that you've witnessed these 8 transformative techniques in action through both Frank's community meeting and Gary's family reunion, you have a complete toolkit for turning conflict into connection. These aren't abstract theories or complicated psychological concepts that sound good on paper, but fail in real life. Instead, they're practical methods that work especially well for people who have the life experience, emotional intelligence, and patience that comes with maturity. Let me remind you of all 8 techniques that can completely change how you handle family conflicts and community disagreements. First, strategic silence gives you the power to break escalation patterns. By choosing stillness over shouting, creating space for emotions to settle and attention to focus on solutions rather than problems. Second, emotional mirroring allows you to validate feelings without endorsing destructive behavior, helping angry people feel heard so they can move beyond defensiveness toward collaboration. Third, the reset question shifts conversations from blame and grievances toward future solutions, transforming adversaries into collaborators working toward common goals. Fourth, acknowledgement without agreement maintains relationships while preserving boundaries, allowing you to validate effort and good intentions without committing to outcomes that might not work for everyone. Fifth, controlled breathing response demonstrates how your physiological calm can influence entire group dynamics, creating pockets of stability in emotional storms that unconsciously encourage others to regulate their own responses. Sixth, boundary setting with compassion protects everyone's dignity while maintaining family bonds, clearly stating what behavior needs to change while delivering that message with understanding rather than punishment. Seventh, the perspective shift reconnects people with shared values that transcend immediate conflicts, moving discussions from who's right or wrong to what matters most to everyone involved. And eighth, collaborative problem-solving ensures that everyone feels included in creating solutions rather than having resolutions imposed upon them, transforming conflicts into opportunities for deeper connection and mutual understanding. These techniques work because they're designed for people who understand that real strength lies not in overpowering others, but in creating space for everyone to be heard and respected. You don't need to be louder or more aggressive than the people causing chaos around you. Instead, you become the calm center that draws others away from destructive patterns and towards productive conversation. Your role isn't to fix everyone's problems or force them to agree with each other. Rather, you become the person who knows how to shift energy in any room, how to help people feel understood, and how to guide groups toward solutions that honor everyone's dignity. The beautiful truth is that these techniques require exactly the kind of wisdom and emotional maturity that you've developed over decades of life experience. Younger people often feel compelled to react immediately to conflict, to take sides, or to impose solutions through force of personality. But you have learned that sustainable solutions require everyone to feel heard and respected. You know that winning an argument isn't worth destroying relationships, and you have the patience to let techniques like strategic silence work their magic over time. Your age and experience aren't obstacles to effective conflict resolution. They're your greatest advantages. The wisdom you've accumulated over the years becomes the foundation for techniques that can transform chaos into connection. You've lived long enough to see the long-term consequences of both conflict and cooperation. You understand that preserving relationships matters more than being right, and you have the emotional intelligence to channel your natural authority into approaches that create space for everyone to contribute to solutions. Think about the conflicts in your own life right now. Maybe there's tension with an adult child who makes decisions you don't understand. Perhaps there's a community issue that's dividing neighbors you've known for years. Or maybe there's an ongoing family dispute that erupts every time everyone gets together for holidays or celebrations. These situations don't have to continue causing pain and division in your life. How are you going to apply these 8 techniques to transform your own challenging relationships? Which conflicts in your life could benefit from strategic silence instead of immediate reaction? Where could emotional mirroring help you connect with someone who seems unreasonably angry or defensive? What family or community situations might be completely changed by asking the reset question that shifts focus from blame to solutions? I want to challenge you to choose one relationship or situation where you're going to practice these approaches. Don't wait for the other person to change or for circumstances to improve on their own. You have the power to transform conflicts simply by choosing to respond differently than you have in the past. Your wisdom, patience, and life experience give you everything you need to become the person others look to when tensions rise and emotions threaten to destroy important relationships. The techniques you've learned today can turn you into a source of peace and stability in your family and community. You can become the person who knows how to create space for healing, understanding, and genuine connection, even in the most challenging circumstances. This is leadership that flows from wisdom rather than power, and it's particularly effective for people who have lived long enough to understand what truly matters in life. Your relationships are worth the effort it takes to master these approaches. The people you love deserve to experience your wisdom channeled through practical tools that actually work when emotions are running high. And you deserve to live your later years surrounded by connection and understanding, rather than ongoing conflict and division. If this content has inspired you to approach your relationships differently, and you want more wisdom designed specifically for your stage of life, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for practical guidance that honors your experience and intelligence.